Hi, everybody. The agenda says the anti-racist part first. So I don't know if people like to follow that or if they just want to go with the flow. And so whatever you like. Michelle?
Let's just go in order of the program.
Okay. So I know we don't have much time each. So hi, everybody, and welcome. So interesting coming off of the keynote speaker today. So what I'm doing is just a tiny little thing to share around linguistic equity. All right, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so this is just sharing a little bit of things that I do to help students. Oh, let me start my timer. Play around to learn if they do want to learn some of the moves that academic writers tend to use in their writing, and then to help them see the system of academic language as a system that has been created that they can choose to engage in or resist, and then just an exercise to help them find their voice. And then to show that when I have them play around in these ways, they always get 100% for practicing. I don't evaluate their writing as such. So these are just a few small ideas. Can everyone see the screen okay? Okay, great. All right, so the first one is based on my work under Asao Inoue, who's done a lot of work in anti-racist writing assessment, and also based on the Washington State Anti-Racist Curriculum Initiative grant. So based on that, it's not ethical for me to judge the quality of student writing based on one standard, but I feel like it is ethical for me to teach how American academics use language, since my students really want this knowledge. So here, students can play with academic writing. And so the items that I choose to teach is based on my students' past experiences with rules and what counts as good writing. So I'm kind of trying to disrupt that. So this first exercise, trying to make the screen bigger, is playing with academic style. So just to try different language conventions that academics and professional writers tend to use, and then to try out different styles and see how they feel about that, and to reflect on how punctuation and style choices might communicate meaning. So for 100%, they just need to choose a topic. If we're working on an essay, they can choose that topic, or they can choose any topic they like. I often encourage them to write about their girlfriend or their cat or their goals in college. This is just a place for them to play and practice with style. And whether they make a mistake or follow the convention, doesn't matter. They're just getting credit for trying. So I give them this handout on conventions for punctuation in college essays. So just to let them know, there are many world Englishes in use today. Each one is correct, valuable, and follows its own rules. Across the world, there are a variety of standardized Englishes, and groups just communicate using conventions. So when they go to a certain group, the group doesn't even realize they've agreed on these certain rules. And that's where, depending on the group you go to, you might want to know, oh, what are the conventions they're using here? So since they're taking an American college course with me, I teach them what are the standard edited American English conventions, and then they can decide if they want to use those or not. But those are what my students are eager to at least know about. And so although there's variation even within every group, many conventions are the same. So I just give them the conventions that are used in American academic writing. How do they use a period? How do they use a semicolon? What does it mean in communication terms? If they use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, what does that mean in communication terms? When they're using a dependent or subordinate word, how is that communicating? If they want to play around and use a colon, how does that communicate? If they want to interrupt with a set of dashes or parentheses, for example, they can try to sound funny, or they can drop information that's more or less important. So I just give them a whole bunch of different ways that tend to be used in American academic writing if they want to play around with that. Just trying to get all my stuff off the screen. Okay, so then they just choose at least 3 that they want to play around with. And so using any topic they want, sometimes I encourage them to try to write something funny or not too serious, and just see if you want to understand these conventions, here's how you can play around with these. So the first thing is choose a topic and then choose any three of these you want to try. Maybe you want to try putting a really short sentence next to a long sentence. Maybe you want to try starting a sentence with something other than a standard subject and verb. And so they have examples of all those things they can try. And so they get 100% for either showing me 3 different sentences where they tried some styles, or they decided they wanted to put it all in a paragraph. And so I just give them an example of a writer using these different moves in ways that create meaning from this writer. So that is one thing that I do, and I always do it separate from their essays. So whether they ever use these moves or not, I'm just exposing them and they can play with them and it's up to them. And then the second thing that I do is after they've written a draft, I have some various ways for them to revise their essay. And I'm trying to call their attention to these 3 things. One is consider the conventions that academic power system created and decide if you want to follow those conventions or if you want to push back. Because a lot of my students are invested in getting into the academic system. They're not yet ready to disregard it. The other thing I want them to learn is that rules that they've been taught are just conventions. They're just what a group agreed on, or they're just habits people have agreed on. They're not universal and they're not better than any other conventions. And the third thing I'm trying to invite them to do as they revise each essay is to develop their own personal voice. So this assignment, I want them to see that groups choose conventions to follow. I want them to reflect on what they've been taught are rules, and then I want them to make some style choices. So the first thing I ask them to do is consider and then decide to follow or to resist the convention of using a capital I for pronouns. Capital I for pronouns is used in all edited writing for business and colleges, research, and publishing in America. But there have been movements from BIPOC writers to use lowercase I pronouns to resist standard English that has been forced onto other cultures. So use the little I pronoun every time in your essay if you either want to show resistance to using this standard edited American English, or if you want to argue that little I is so common in usage today that it has a place in academic writing. So I just want them to be aware. Sometimes they're just typing without really looking at what they're writing. Make a decision. Do you want to make all your I's big and why? Or do you want to make all your personal pronouns lowercase and then just say why you're making that choice? So just to get their awareness. Just going to let people in. Okay. Admit all. All right. And then the next thing is, again, lots of choice. I just want them to choose 2 different things to try out on their draft. And it doesn't matter how well they do it. I just want them to play around and try. So this is the second thing I'm trying to get them to do is think about the conventions and the rules that you have learned. Where did those rules come from? So in this case, based on my students for the past, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years, they're always been taught you can't start a sentence with fanboys. You can't start a sentence with but. So I asked them to do this. Please start a sentence with, please start 3 sentences with a coordinating conjunction to actively realize that some rules you may have learned aren't even rules. They're just ideas that some groups agreed to, like don't start a sentence with but. It's actually grammatically correct. And it's really, really common. And you'll see it in writing all the time. You just need a complete sentence after it if you want to follow that convention. So I ask them if they want to try that, or they can try, again, sentence variety, trying short sentences and long sentences. The other thing I like to do is really get them to play with their voice. And this is actually one of the ways that helps them develop their voice. And then the other one is read your essay out loud. It's the same whether they read it to a person or their animal or their plant or their photo, it works for them. Assume that it is clear and interesting already. Often we overcorrect to try to please others or when we get nervous. If you hear any sentences or words that don't fit your personal style or it's not clear to you what you're saying, change them to be clear to you in your style. And then I have some other things they can do. They can try, writing to be concise, to get their focus more clear, and some other things. But those are the 3 main things I'm trying to get them to do, is to see these conventions are just made up by groups. Do you want to follow them? And then really try to hone your paper for your own voice. Okay. And then in my class, you just earn 100% for practice. So all my assessments are a checklist. Did you do the practice move or did you not do the practice move? I don't grade them for quality. So there's a lot going on in the chat, and I'm just oh, good, great, thanks. Oh, if you guys could just even unmute yourselves. Great, thanks for all that. Okay, great. Let's see. So what else do I want to show? Oh, 3 minutes for questions. Wait a minute. Oh, student samples. Let me show you my samples because I have just a couple minutes. And then I'm going to just have us chat for a few minutes. And then I'm going to have you play around. So I would like to go back and just show you there we go. So as soon as I'm done showing you my student example, I'd like to take a few minutes for questions. Then I'd like to give you a nice chunk of time where you can choose an assignment. I can give you 3 of mine to work on, or you can choose to revise one that you brought for today. And then I'm hoping our final time will be where we can share ideas that we came up with and challenges that we thought of to make those ideas happen. So I do just want to show you, again, this is my student population, although we are largely students of color at my institution. My students have just really been drilled into them, follow the rules. So this is my first student. She decided to use lowercase I. Looking back to what I thought good writing was, I had thought it was bound by what anyone and seemingly everyone abided by. I had thought that I needed to be just like everyone else instead of searching for my own writing style and opinions. But now I see good writing is what I want it to be and to embrace it with confidence. Good writing is everything shown in this very essay. Repeating words as many times as I need, starting a sentence with and or but, and even using a lowercase I. Because even though these are all points that others may disagree with me as to what good writing is, I know that either way, I am still saying my main idea clearly and being understood. So she really drank the Kool-Aid. That was cool. And then this student is wanting to write in a very academic voice, but she still decided to start with a fan voice, making a beautiful transition into her next paragraph. And then this student embraced using his own voice. So it's an academic essay. He's replying to sources, but I love his voice. I don't want athletes to think that only my opinion matters and that they shouldn't do the plant-based diet, because as I stated, all athletes should do what's best for them. I just didn't agree with how a vegan diet by physicians committee only wants athletes to have a vegan diet. So just lots of ways for students to express their voice. And I don't evaluate the quality of their writing. I just have them play around with stuff as they choose. So, okay, I've been finished early. So I'd like to just open it up for any comments or questions that people want to make. If you unmute yourself, I love that. Oh, Catherine Egan raised her hand, please.
Thank you so much. I really love your handout. I hope you put it in the chat so we can credit you and adapt.
Oh, just take it.
Oh, thank you. I've been trying to do this type of thing, giving them a sense of choices they have to make. And so I really am interested in how you're trying to do it. And I wonder what made you choose, perhaps it was following students' leads because they really wanted to know the rules, but I was wondering what made you think about starting first by teaching them the rules as a and then having them, resist or, experiment versus
Oh, yeah.
kind of the other way. Because I was, after hearing Sun Michaud's talk, I was thinking I need to figure out a way, and I'm just not quite knowing how to do it yet, to connect with students. And like he was giving the example of how verb tenses work in Gullah Geechee or whatever, right? Or how their understanding in either their home language or in native English slang or whatever it is, how they think the tenses work, and then kind of saying, well, this is, so anyway, I just wonder if you've thought about the order.
Not as much as I have now that you said that. So I love that idea. Thank you for that. And coming to today's conference, I can totally think about switching that around. Yeah. I mean, I do respond
There's
to
probably
students.
pluses and minuses to both, I guess.
Absolutely. They're like, I'm here to learn. So Noel, please.
Oh yeah, it's Noelle, sorry.
Noel.
Yeah, I love that portion of the talk where a student is speaking. I believe that was when he was discussing Ebonics and then the disappearance of that. So when a student is speaking in their own vernacular or register, and you are the educator or the facilitator, of being aware of offering, hey, that verb tense you used right there. Well, it's also used this way in academic speak or whatever. So I liked his focus on, your consciousness when offering another choice versus correcting. And with the creative writing, it's often like Katie's question was, it's often giving the rules so and have intention behind when you break them. But I like the flip of letting the person's vernacular come out and then offering different choices. So I thought that was a nice distinction. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think most of my students, not only do they not speak English as a first language, but they're actively coming from other cultures. So they've been teaching me for years. We would never do it that way. So that's why I frame everything as this is just how Americans do it here in this particular little context. And so now I always incorporate, here's how you would do it in this language, and here's how you would do it in this culture. So, but thank you so much for that. Kate, please.
So, I'll introduce myself really briefly. My name is Kate. I am from the Sierra College Writing Center. I'm a writing center person. And so I'm one of the person who's like a middleman between the student and the professor. And oftentimes we kind of find ourselves in a tight spot where we really want to empower the student, but at the same time, we find ourselves like telling them to have a voice, but take your eye out of the paper, if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, I know. So
do you have any words of advice for people in my position?
Who's telling them to take the eye out of the paper? Who's told them that? The teacher?
The professor. They have it. Yeah, they have it written specifically on the prompt, like do not use the word I. Do not use anything except for third person.
I don't know what to say because I've been fighting against it. I encourage, please use I. Who's writing here? It's you. So do I have?
My answer would be this teacher must really want a bunch of essays that are written from ChatGPT.
ChatGPT. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think that my writing center at Las Positas College, our writing center has adopted a linguistic justice statement, and we share that with our faculty and our students as well. So that might be something to think about.
All right, so I don't know if y'all are up for it, but here in the chat, I am giving you, if you didn't bring your own assignment, three that I shared with you. Actually, I shared with you two, and my third one is an actual whole essay assignment. So everything they do for me is a checklist of you did it or you didn't do it. So you played around with 3 styles or you didn't. And then I've also included how they do their essay for me. Everything is they did this thing or they didn't do this thing, so that I'm actively not judging the quality. So I am going to start a timer. We've probably got about 13 minutes now. If you would like to get in there and then imagine an assignment that you could write, or if you have something of your own, I mean, you could even do this if you were trying to teach any kind of move, you could try this. So here's my little timer. Oh, it's going to show everybody the timer. Yeah, it's 14 minutes. It's a little, I think I should go back and choose a different timer. Let's choose a 12-minute timer.
So are we creating possible assignments, or are we doing this? Are we in the student mode doing the assignment?
Oh, you're not doing the assignment.
Okay.
So it's your choice if you want to either, so I think I put in the chat 3 blank assignments, right? So you can, if you click on one of the ones that I put in the chat, then you will be able to, as an instructor, write an assignment. Or if you brought your own, you can revise it. Or you guys can tell me, we don't want to do this right now. We just want to talk some more. Do y'all want to play around in there for a few minutes? Open them up and see what you got there.
I don't know if I have the options. How do is it in the chat? You say it's a link?
Yeah, there's just, yep. My comment there's 3 different links. So you should be able to click on any one of those. Play to learn.
Oh, here we go.
See the
Thank you
system.
so much.
You need permission to edit them. Oh, right. I think what I'd like you to do is actually just go ahead and make a copy for yourself, because otherwise you're all trying to edit in the same on it on your own. Whoops. I don't know why that moved.
That's actually disallowed if we don't have
Oh,
that
okay.
access, I think.
Okay, let me get in there real quick and fix that. Let's see. Okay. Um, wow, interesting. Okay.
It's letting me make a copy.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it
You just
didn't
have to
let
go
me
to
for some
file.
reason. Yeah.
Oh, I wonder if you have to be logged in differently somehow. Well, let's see. Let me open this one. Okay, if I'm going to open some of them up for editing, so if I put that in the chat, just again, go ahead and make your own copy after you get it. Let me do that for you. Okay, there's one that's open for editing. Oopsie. And then oh, that's mine. Whoops. So maybe take a few minutes to imagine and start to draft in there what you might, how you might, if you have an assignment where you currently evaluate things with a rubric or in quality, how you might reimagine that. Would it be useful for y'all to have me share those different, go through those different assignments? Or are you working just fine on your own?
No, I'd like to see yours. So
Do you
if
have,
you have
a
sample.
book that you could share?
So for example, so I'll share this one. Okay. So if I were to, okay, so I want my students to play with academic style, right? And so for 100% in your class, what would you like them to do to play with academic style? And so you could say, oh, I want you to do this, or even just, you could change this. You could say, no, I don't want that. I want them to play with style, right? So try writing this way, try writing that way. So trying to create an assignment for your students where no matter what they do, if they try to play in some of the different ways that you suggest, they get 100%, right? So mine was playing with academic style because they desperately want to learn it. And also if they're playing with it, then their brain doesn't shut down. They're like, oh, okay. And so they're afraid to enter the academic world. They're not sure what they want. So that's one where I'm just inviting you to write some. So let's see, play with style. Okay, write 2 sentences like you are speaking to your grandma. Maybe use quotes to show what you say. So something like that, just whatever you want them to play around with, you know, that could be an idea. And then the other one I wanted to show is, this is my academic essay, where I try to remove things like clearly or well organized or beautifully explained or thoughtfully, like all these judgmental adjectives, which are still in the AACNU rubrics. So I try to write assignments where there's no judgmental words, and I'm just showing them is something absent or present. So do they type or also handwrite? They can type, but anytime somebody wants to handwrite and turn it in, they're always welcome to do that. So I wonder, would it be useful for you to see my original assignment here where I do the checklist?
Yeah, if we could see like a rubric too, I think that would be amazing.
I don't use a rubric. So I will show you. Here we go. So here is my actual assignment. So it's not 100% perfect in terms of being non-judgmental, but for 100%, like, is there a word count? Yes or no? Okay, you made it. So this, they're like, okay, I only need 725 words, but you know, if they write an amazing essay, so however long they get, whatever. Is there a statement at the top of one audience they're writing for chosen from our class list? Yes or no? Show that you've heard and understood ideas from 3 or more sources. It has to be from an article or a TED Talk, but all you have to do is use 3 or more quotes and 2 or more paraphrases. So, and you can use summary if you want. So can I check quotes? Yes. Paraphrases? Yes. I'm really trying not to evaluate their product. So I give them lots of practice, but I try not to evaluate their product. There's a thesis that states your main idea in response to one class source. In my class, we actually say, I agree or I disagree, but I'm not going to evaluate their thesis. They just need to have one. There's an introduction, body, and conclusion. The contents are up to you, but I do want one implication in the conclusion. So what? Who cares? What should we do now? Body paragraphs provide 2 or more kinds of evidence. Did you give a personal experience example? Did you quote an expert? Did you give one fact or study or data? Did you give one paragraph explaining your own logic? So things that I can yes, no. So you could riff off of this if you want and say, how could I turn my rubric into a checklist? Well, I'm just not judging the quality. So.
And then when something is missing, because I'm kind of doing complete, incomplete.
Right.
What is the step? Do you have them just revise?
So go ahead.
No, that was my question.
Somebody else says something. I was doing complete, incomplete, and one of my students kept like not getting a complete, and she was frustrated. So now I'm like, if you do anything less than 100%, you get 75%. And I'm like, oh, 75%, and you get 2 more chances. And I'm like, you just missed item number 4. Just add item number 4. So yeah, so they get 75%, and then they get to just try it again to add that extra. And I just do that because it works better with Canvas and because they're in these other systems where they're being graded. And so complete, incomplete, and all my contract grading was difficult for students who weren't fully plugged in to really understand. So this sort of fits into their little minds more, and it gives them, you know, most of the credit if they did most of the work. So on this one, I don't do any judgment of grammar or punctuation at all. I do have this one thing, which I'd love to get y'all's feedback on. I do tell them it's really hard for people to read if you put a space after a punctuation, or if you don't capitalize after a period, or if you just like don't put any space there, or if you put a space around quotations so we can't quite tell what you're quoting. I do try to tell them there's only 3 places where this didn't happen. Do y'all think that seems that, I mean, well, I want to ask you what you think about that, but I also have them vote. We get together as a class and they decide if they want to get rid of some of these or if they want to add more or whatever. But I don't know if y'all have thoughts about that one.
I think it would be too much work for me to count the places. Only 3 or whatever, you know. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
The reason I instituted it is because my students come from non-tech backgrounds. They're not used to they're immigrants, and so they're like, I don't know where the punctuation goes, and somehow the software they're using isn't helping them. And so I guess I feel like when I send them into their other courses with these other instructors, I want them to know how to edit. Like, you need to put spaces, you know. And it's super easy for me because once you find 3, you're done. You're like, oh, you had more than 3, just fix a couple of them. And to me, it disrupts the reading for their other professors. So it's just a service to their other classes. You know?
I think that's a bit of a slippery slope. I mean, I would do exactly what you're doing, but this argument can be used for pretty much any other rule.
Yeah.
And the argument can also be, well, I'm just teaching them the standard because
Yeah.
they're going to be going to other courses. So
Yeah.
what we're talking about isn't a technical issue, it's more the philosophical idea behind it, right? Why do we want to teach them a standard or tell them not to use the standard? And this makes me think of a colleague of mine who teaches Spanish, and we used to get into this, not argument, but we'd really talk about students who were learning Spanish. They were learning Spanish because they wanted to learn how to put the accents on the words correctly. And he would get really frustrated because he's like, that's not what learning Spanish is about. But that's what they wanted because for some reason they thought that's what learning Spanish is about. And we're kind of intermediaries between giving students a tool that will help them and understanding that this tool has a history. And so that's where the point that you're asking about, that's the whole point, right? How much do we want to standardize and how much do we want to invite them to resist or contradict or whatever word you used earlier.
Yeah.
And again, how can they resist and contradict if they don't know the standard to begin with?
Well, again, I'm loving that. Thank you guys so much for letting me bring this to you. And I'm realizing you're exactly right. So they do want to know the standard desperately, but maybe I take it off of, because I'm also feeling guilty, like I'm not preparing them, So what I have them do is I'm like, tell me the 3 to 5 goals you have for this class. So if this isn't your goal, I need to get out because that's not your goal. So yeah, so I have my own, like, I think I want to make sure that you have the basics here, but I think I could take that one off. Yeah. So we have 2 more minutes. So my plan, which may mean nothing, was to see if anybody had any, let's go ahead and slide to this. Did anybody have any, boy, is it not working for me? There we go. Ideas that came to you about how you might do an assignment or challenges that you can see. You're like, oh, I want to do this, but I can see this challenge for myself.
I teach English in Long Beach City College, and my students write identity papers, and I assign readings with many different languages, and to show them how to include languages that they are familiar with to speak for themselves. And I encourage them to use those languages. And I want to know their purpose of writing those papers before I correct them. If you are writing something for yourself, that's cool. I will accept anything. But if you're writing to publish in an academic structure, I can show you how they expect you to do it. But most of my students are not taking the composition classes to be published, or nor do they want to be writers or publishers or in professional fields. Some of them want to be plumbers or welders, and they probably never ever want to be published. So I want to know the purpose first before I know how to help them. So one of the things I do is, what do you want to do with this paper? But I also know what I assigned the paper for, an identity paper. Yeah, which means they have a lot of room to play with. And because I'm Chinese and I'm familiar with Asian languages, and I'm able to see patterns that are in English and non-English, especially Chinese. And I can help my Asian students in certain ways. But when I meet students that are non-Asians, I am more than willing to learn from them. I can ask them, can you explain to me what this is about and how can I learn from this?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my time is up. So I tried to spend just 35 minutes. And so Michelle, please, over to you.
No, sorry about that. We have an hour Zoom because I'm recording on my local computer and I didn't want us to not record the whole session. So I was like starting to panic a little bit. So sorry for that panic mode that I went into. I'm Michelle, and The name of my session is, oh wait, where's my screen? Let me start sharing and find the right, oh, I'm seeing something else. All right, let me go over to my slide deck. Yeah, this is the other reason why you panic, because you have so many technical things to find. There we go. I'm going to go into present mode. Can you see the presentation, Lisa?
Yeah, we see.
Great. Thank you. So this is a summary version of a scholarly chapter, peer-reviewed chapter that I wrote for an upcoming anthology called Reconceptualizing Feedback. It's going to be published on in Utah by Utah State University Press. The title is inspired by a Joe Strummer quote. Joe Strummer is a singer of a punk band called The Clash, my very favorite band. Title of this session is called Not Just One White Way Down the Middle of the Road, an argument for identity in academic writing and strengths-based assessment. Ooh, let me get over. All right. So I'll be reading some passages and also just talking a little bit about things on the slide. Our students have been leading us to this place for years, this place where we can clearly see that standard English is not inherently better, clearer, and more effective than any other English. For us to believe otherwise is to be agringada, or wholly assimilated to white American culture or white middle class ways and values. The term agringada, of course, means whitewashed, or it's like assimilated. And it's a word that was popularized by the Pachuco movement from the 1940s, the Zoot Suiters from the 1940s, during a time when there still were like government-related agencies actively Americanizing Mexican Americans in the United States, particularly in the Southwest. And the term was created out of and popularized out of a pressure, a condition or a pressure on those youth to assimilate. And it was a critique of the pressure to give up Mexicanidad for whiteness. And these are some Zoot Suiters who were actually arrested during the Zoot Suit riots, or before the Zoot Suit riots actually happened. This is a real comment that I got from a student many years ago, and I've gotten others like it that question the way we teach writing. This comment, others like it, got me to reflect on our practices and to interrogate them and ultimately to commit to this work. This paper will focus on how we were taught to write and how we are trained as teachers and all the ways this training is deeply rooted in standard English, in all of its assimilationist forms, and how that training practically requires a focus on error, especially when it comes to non-standard forms. When at the college level, what we should really be focusing on are ideas. Our job is to teach effective communication in writing. Doing that by endorsing the standard language model is racist pedagogy, especially in a 21st century America. In their essay, Working Language, Alvarez, Juan, and Lee call for working language, arguing that through our individual idiolects, we all come equipped with a variety of strategies, rendering strict adherence to standard English unnecessary, asserting that some of the difficulties that many students experience finding the right words is a side effect of the monolingual identity construct perpetuated in education. Seeing how so many of my students performed the scholarly voice or standard English or academic writing caused me to throw out any focus on prescriptive standards and usher in a focus on our students' ideas, their voices, and what they actually have to say, rather than whether it conforms to standard English. When I talk about linguistic justice, I often use the phrase authentic voice. It is, in a sense, a shorthand for voicings, as I recognize that we all have different voices for different settings or topics. We can also think of these different voices as registers. We all have different voices for different settings or topics, and in some of these, we can even use different registers or level of formality or informality. This is the students' rights to their own language statement. Many of you are probably familiar with it if you're here today. It says, we affirm the students' rights to their own patterns and varieties of language, the dialects of their nurture, or whatever dialects in which they find their own identity and style. Language scholars long ago denied that the myth of standard American dialect has any validity. The claim that any one dialect is unacceptable amounts to an attempt of one such social group to exert its dominance over others. It's also immoral advice for humans. A nation proud of its diverse heritage and its cultural and racial variety will preserve its heritage of dialects, and so on. In around 2017, I began introducing the concept of positionality as a way to help my students see how to bring their voices, experiment with registers, and value personal experience. And then after that, I discovered the Conference on College Composition and Communications language statement and the longer article that accompanies it. This language statement and document gave me permission, language, research, like 3 to 5 pages of works cited, and a whole organization to back up the new practices that I was using in my classes that were largely inspired by the work that I was doing in the Puente program, working with Puente students, many of whom speak 2 or more languages. Oops. Many of my own teachers taught texts written in dialect or experimental forms as models for writing, but expected responses to be more or less standard. I remember that this felt like a setup, a nod to diverse texts the teachers seemed to believe was the work of a rare genius. The message that it sent to me and still sends to me today was that these teachers were making an attempt to provide diverse texts in the classroom, but actually seemed to ascribe to the idea that there really aren't very many people who can do this genius work, and they really didn't see that or even offer for us the opportunity to be one of these geniuses. I used to tell my students to learn the rules first so they could learn how to best break them. Now I understand that the rules do not reflect the realities of languaging in a multi-ethnic, multilingual nation. I've always hated rubrics. They purport to make understanding what's expected, the standards, easier, but they are often too chock full of information, teacher jargon, so many words and boxes and lines that work like borders or jail cells, jail bars, keeping some language styling in and some out. In our discussions about the limitations of rubrics and how sometimes you have to fudge them when you see something that's so beautiful or wild or creative that doesn't fit the rubric, my colleague Keisha Quesada Turner said, yeah, sometimes the paper is doper than the rubric. Keisha's leading the student panel today. You'll definitely see her. I met at CIRI at a time when my grading practices were changing to match my new pedagogies. I didn't want to use rubrics. I wanted to focus on what was working in my students' work, to use their own writing and ideas to help them develop their own voices and to coach them to draw on their own cultural wealth and lived experiences to interpret and respond to what they read. It was during pandemic, and at CIRI would meet with me during my Zoom office hours from her work at her parents' flea market stall, selling hats and boots from Mexico. It was winter and she was bundled up. She often looked cold. It made me wonder if I were in her shoes, if I would have had the ganas to bother with office hours at all. The first essay she wrote that really caught my attention was an in-class reader response style essay that asked students their views on the American dream and asked whether they believed in it or not, and it encouraged use of personal examples and textual references to support their ideas. The personal nature of the opening of Atsiri's essay and her focus on the allure of the American dream on immigrants grabbed my attention straight away, but so did the standard English errors. I remember leaning forward in my chair so I could see better and read faster, a sign that I was hooked, drawn in by the interesting angle. But still, the urge I felt to make suggestions to increase clarity for practically each line, despite how engaged I was in her perspective, highlighted how much of my own college education and to some extent the will of my department trained me to focus on the mistakes, which makes it very near impossible to focus on anything else. While I had made a commitment to change, it took a concerted effort to resist communicating on the sentence structure, commenting on the sentence structure, and to listen to its theory. Recalling my own traumatic experiences as a student, like when my teacher in grad school complained about comma splices, "You should know this stuff already," she wrote on my paper in the margins. While working with its theory illustrated for me how a hyper-focus on correctness is largely designed to teach students like her to assimilate, to adopt the voice of the academy, to sound white. Conversely, I remember being told in graduate school that I couldn't get an A, unless the thesis ideas were unique or fresh. So what's more important, grammatical correctness, demonstrable creative critical thinking, or fresh ideas? In the opening, let me move forward. In the opening of its series essay, I saw how her non-standard English pronoun use and clarity issues that when paired with her last name would have made many instructors label her Generation 1.5, a term that I've always abhorred. As a daughter and a sibling of immigrants, I know that the American dream is like an object all immigrants hope to have in their life. They hope to reach for it and live with it as long as possible. The American dream is set to express all the wonderful things it has to offer, but most definitely never includes its worst. The American dream has given my family and I a well-settled life. It has given my siblings a workspace and education and has given both my parents peace. But with that, we have carried hate, discrimination, racial comments, lost opportunities, and punishments. For these reasons is why I don't believe in the American dream. I also, when I read this paper, recognized how the phrase carried hate was constructed from a Spanish speaker translation and Spanish speaker accent. I chose not to comment on those errors in the opening of the essay so I can focus on its series ideas instead. I wrote this in the margins and didn't write anything about the grammar or sentence structure. By the way, I have its series permission to share all of this work and to give her background information. Putting grammar and standard English clarity aside gave me space to see the critical thinking moves that Itsiri was making and the kinds of intelligence she was using to make them, like the paradoxes that she identifies, the ways in which her family has benefited from leaving Mexico in pursuit of the dream, but also the fallout, the effects of racial discrimination, lost opportunities, and punishments. Had I been using a traditional rubric, I would have just ragged on correctness and spent a bunch of time justifying the grade. After the first semester of linguistic justice curriculum, Puente is a 2-semester program, which included readings and linguistic justice style encouraged responses. The result for Itsiri was a literary style analysis essay that demonstrates an increase in clarity of her standard English and inclusion of code meshing using Spanish words and phrases. And there was an additional result. Itsiri began making brazen use of her cultural wealth through her use of Spanish for the purpose of literary analysis. This essay is about female rebels in dystopian literature. The 2 novels that she's discussing here are 1984 and We. In the real world, in-charge chingonas are female who work hard to be independent from everyone and everything, believe in themselves, and motivate themselves and others to push to become the best person one can be. As a woman reader, it's exciting to see depictions of powerful women, chingonas, but that depiction can't be separated from what appears to be disdain or fear by the male authors, and how both authors' depictions of women seem to be pointing out what they believe are acceptable ways for women to behave. The chingona in 1984, Julia, begins with a note that simply addresses the words, "I love you." Winston is initially suspicious by this message, but is eventually triggered to know more about her. Accessing these phrases and concepts in Spanish as she read these texts aided Itsiri's understanding of what she read, and they played a major role in her textual analysis. These excerpts writing from her from her second semester English course demonstrates an increase of clarity and control of ideas, and the Spanish speaker's accent is now mostly voiced through use of a sprinkling of Spanish words whose concepts highlight the cultural perspective used to interpret them. Oh, I've lost my page. Here's another passage. The chingona side of Julia is exposed the minute she expects to receive attention from Winston, because she comes up with this perfectly planned out plan of preparing a note that will eventually be given out to a man who she will pretend to fall down in front of and hope to receive some form of attention. I'd say this would be an example of plan con maña. It made me clear that her chief form of rebellion is habitual and revealed by the background history of her sexuality and how she had continuous intimate relationships with multiple men before her relationship with Winston. Etsyri's use of the phrase plan con maña, which means like a premeditated, non-nefarious ulterior motive, it's a common phrase in Mexico and El Salvador, illustrates how accessing her mother tongue and accompanying cultural wealth aided in her keen read of the text. By seeing Julia as the celebrated chingona, Etsyri was able to see her not as a promiscuous, sex-obsessed girl, but as a young woman born into a totalitarian system and not still totally brainwashed by it. In Etsyri's read of the text, Julia isn't simply reacting or acting out. She has instead developed an intelligently crafted plan to save her own ass and to get some pleasure while doing it. When I read this paper the first time, I was literally going, whoop, and like pumping my fists in the air. I literally almost fell off the chair because I was so excited to know such a thinker and a writer. Following this Etsyri's cohort in the following year, during the 2021 school year, I combined my strengths-based grading and feedback practices with additional insight from my students and created the questions that are now what I call the LSR, or the less shitty rubric. I did create this rubric in part with some consultation with Keisha Casada-Turner and Karen Spern. I resisted the idea of creating it, but decided that if I was going to create another rubric, it would embody linguistic justice values. And I did this by first creating and then following some guiding questions. Now, some of these guiding questions and some of the discussions that went into creating these guiding questions came from classroom discussions that I had with my students, because they were grappling with how to grade code meshed writing. So then we went on the board, we had a big class discussion, and we wrote on the board what kinds of things we might like to see in the rubric to help us develop, or to help us assess that work. And so I created these guiding questions somewhat from those discussions, and then also the rubric that follows. So the first guiding question is, how can we show that we value risk-taking or code meshing? How do we respond in a way that a student understands and doesn't shut them down? I had been thinking a lot about my own comments and students' work, like unclear and then not saying anything else about it, like how that can shut a student down. Other dismissive similar comments that I've made in the past. And how do we account for style, originality, and multilingualism in our assessment tools? So those are the guiding questions. The rubric that follows changes depending on the assignment. Sometimes I personally don't even use the rubric. Most of the time I have my students use it when they do peer review, and it also changes assignment to assignment often. I would definitely encourage you all to develop your own guiding questions, and then to use them to create a rubric, or just use them as your guiding questions as you grade student work. So here's the rubric. It's called the LSR, the less shitty rubric. And I do give a lot of encouragement and praise. Sometimes those are like Lisa, I really loved what Lisa was talking about and not using judgmental language, but I do use it as a way to give students encouragement, because a lot of the students that we're teaching do feel really scarred by their education in English in the United States. The feedback, this section is for feedback and questions for the writer. And in some places you could just answer yes or no. And I let my students know that they should probably fill out a few of these when they're using them for peer review, and they can answer yes or no on a couple. The questions on the rubric are interconnected and designed to encourage descriptive rather than prescriptive feedback. Additionally, when the teacher asks honest questions about students' ideas, words, and phrasing, rather than assuming anything non-standard or unfamiliar is an error, the teacher can learn from the student, and the student is more willing to take writing risks, such as engaging authentic voice or code meshing. Asking questions and focusing on what makes us lean in and engage and what's unique is my way of keeping the student engaged in the feedback process without shutting down or getting overwhelmed by comments focused on errors rather than the ideas the teacher purported to care about when they posed the question. And not focusing on so-called errors and demonstrating on our rubrics a desire for style, originality, and multilingualism encourages students to write in their own English and to not sacrifice their own identities in order to learn how to write. As I learned from my student at SIRI, this is an especially important goal, given that our adult students are people, and they're already equipped with many ample ways of voicing and translating with tools and ways of knowing, which is something that Sun Michaud was talking about as a young person. This morning, he talked about how he came to school and he already knew some things, and he wanted to put together what he learned, what he already knew with what he was learning, and felt like he wasn't always allowed to do that. And so I love this quote that I use both at the beginning of the essay and at the end from Juan, what are their names again? Let me find, it's 3 names, 3 authors. Alvarez, Juan, and Lee. Thank you. Anyone? We might have time for questions for either of us, for me or Lisa.
And we're going till 12:35, correct?
We're going to when?
12:35.
Okay. I have 13 minutes on my Zoom timer, so we'll go till then. Thanks, Julie. Questions for Lisa or me or anything? Keelan says she likes that at SIRI didn't italicize chingona. We had a lot of discussions about this because she actually submitted this essay to the Norton Anthology Student Contest. And she worked on it with me over the summer. And she really wanted to do this. It wasn't chosen, but I've written about it so much that I have actually paid her out of my own pocket for this essay a couple of times because I keep credit. It's a way for me to credit her for her work and for her inspiration. So she also asked about, she chose to use a footnoting system as well. So she had a lot of questions about that. So we engaged in a scholarly process around whether to use italics or not. And I explained some things that I've learned as a writer myself and code meshing about why italics can be, they're kind of like the old convention. And I talked about why you might not want to use them. And I let her decide what she wanted to do. Of course.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I love when I started, I've been having a lot of conversations with my students about that too. When I started working with students who were as we kind of looked at the italics and such, it was really powerful to think about. I think Dinez Smith was actually the one that kind of made me see that not using the italics was actually not privileging one language over another, and that was where kind of things changed for me. So I love that you're doing that in your class, and I just love the writing of your student. It was incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, she's a really right away, even in that first essay I identified, I just could see right away what a deep thinker she was. When I stopped, maybe a few semesters before I might have identified a few things, but because I was deeper in my practice, when I stopped being absorbed by the standard English rules, her ideas were much more clear. And I found myself leaning in. And that's why I use that phrase, not because of whatever that woman's name is, Sheryl Sandberg, but I was literally leaning in. And I started thinking to myself, this is really something. Like when you lean forward to read a student's paper, like you should be paying attention to that because that probably means something really important about the ideas. And so I really started talking about that with my students about a way to assess work. And I see Robert Tyndall. Robert, do you have a question for me or
Yeah,
the
yeah, just a quick comment that what I often say to students is their work is poetic. When that kind of fiery presence comes forth. And when that happens, who cares about grammar or capitalization? The point is to get the song coming forth from them. And so that's the kind of language I use. This is it's the music of their language that you want to hear. And then you can tinker around with the grammar afterward if you want. But the main point is to hear the music of their own voice. That's the way I put it to my students.
I love that. I love that. And that is often the place also where you wind up having to fudge the rubric if you're using a rubric, like a standard, that's focused on the standard, language.
Yeah. And in this group, I can say, that's right.
Love it. Thanks.
Forget the rubric. This is poetry. This is powerful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for either of us? Oh, three participants raised their hand.
Yes, 3 people raise their hand.
I can't.
Julie and one other. Julie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is actually a question for Michelle, but for actually either of you as well. I was thinking about kind of critical reading and how challenging it can be for our students when they encounter a text, and then to kind of get what's going on in the text and how we support that process in a way that's similar to this writing. I mean, this is but maybe first geared toward Michelle for sure, but this writing rubric that's so supportive and beautiful, and how we think about that for our developing readers, especially as they're really struggling and often sometimes misinterpreting text, and how we support that process. Curious if there's an analogous way that you think about that.
For reading?
Yeah.
Is there an analogous rubric or analogous strategy?
Yeah, maybe rubric, strategy, way to support that process that has the same kind of vibe. Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of the time, I think about that a lot because sometimes I think a heads up in class about wildly off base interpretations. However, because I do try to just say this over and over again when we're reading a work, that often something is going to creep in, an idea is going to creep in or come into your head. You're going to see a connection. And if you see or feel a connection, it's probably there. It's probably there. And maybe you didn't write about it in a way that I understood yet. I've been trying to use the word yet. I don't think I understand this yet. I don't understand your analysis yet. Tell me what you mean by this particular word. And I try to hash it out with them and help them make it more clear for a broader audience that's not inside their head. I don't know. I think that's really where I am with that right now, I think. Naomi asked, is this applied to research-based papers also? What do you mean this? What's the this, Naomi? Curious.
Hello. Well, the stories you shared was more, it sounds like it was based more on what they had read and drawing, what they got from it, and they're integrating their experiences versus say when I say research, I'm just thinking like my daughter had to do a report on biology, like a family hereditary disorder or illness, etc. So I felt like in that kind of paper she had to write, it was research based. That's what I meant.
Yeah, well, it depends on the kind of research. I mean, I teach a research paper in which the students have to do some primary research and they have to interview some family members. So then they can, that this does apply then. But for like a class like biology, there may be different requirements in the way this teacher is teaching and the science, though I think there's almost always a way to bring yourself to an idea or to a concept. And it can be overt and it could be more covert. The angle, and I talk a lot with my students about the concept of positionality and who you are in the world and how that informs how you see everything that you read and learn and take in, and how those ideas, that positionality can bring a different angle on that same biological topic than another student in the class, and that those can really make the paper your own. And then my other answer is that it feels like right now, because of the AI writing models, that we are in a place where just about every paper, every teacher is going to need to find more ways to help their students engage in their own writing and be more present in it, and to also write from a person, find a way to help students write from personal examples or personal experience in that work, in order to get them more engaged in the process of rewriting and learning, but also to kind of minimize the seduction of the AI writing models, which are right at their fingertips. Anything else? We have 4 minutes on my timer.
I had a question in the chat.
Oh, I'm totally muted. I was typing half an answer to that question, and then I just was going to finish it orally. So
no, do it.
Just from Keelan. What do you say to students about how they should approach faculty they will encounter in the future who may favor standard English over their beautiful voices? I used to say, say to them, which handbook are you using? Because they're never using a handbook. They're just like, I just whatever rules I think are right or whatever. And so just doing that kind of calls their awareness to, I don't know. But I think now what ASAO is telling us is, like, it's never okay anywhere for people to say, this is the academic system and you need to do this. How can we empower students to see that? I don't know, but he's like, we're not demanding enough. We need to be demanding and demanding and demanding that it's not okay. It's not okay anywhere, anytime. I don't know if we can craft some statement that's, because, students, they're like, I just need my grade. It's a hard space. Maybe they could say, my English professor said that this voice is more, fill in the blank. This voice is more, I don't know.
Keisha Casada Turner, who I think is in the room, has written a really great assignment called the prologue assignment, in which the students write a prologue to any work that uses any kind of quote unquote non-standard forms. And it explains to the teacher the choices that the student has decided to make. It's very meta. Like, I mean, what teacher would argue with that? I mean, if you argued with the teacher doing that, you would just be the biggest jerk on the planet. So, and also I think most teachers really love self-reflection and attention to detail. So a prologue, I would say prologue is the way to go. That's one of my answers. Keisha, thank you. I think you're here somewhere. All right, we are at 2 minutes. Anything else? We're going to have a lunch break soon.
Keelan says, how can we approach our departments to update their SLOs? We just updated our SLOs, and I spent months with my anti-racist group. And then I gave it to my coordinator, and she was like, not that many people are here to vote on it. And then she brought it up 3 months later. Do people need to vote on this again? And people were like, I don't want any of this like anti-racist stuff in there. What do I have to teach that? So there was some pushback, and it got a little bit watered down. So we do have new SLOs, but they were ready to just push them away after all that work. And I feel like my institution is kind of in a good place, but maybe not that.
Are you at a community college, Lisa?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, you have the diversity, what is it called, Katie? The diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements now on our course outline, on our course outlines.
I know, and yet you get 20
DEIA
English teachers in a room, and
yeah. Well, our department started with the course outlines. We started changing the course outline of record. That was some really, really wonderful work. All right, it's 12:30, everybody. We have 39 seconds. So I want to thank Lisa.
I want to thank everybody here. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks everybody for being here. It was so fun. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Michelle.
Thank you.
Yay. See everybody on the other side.